Hello, welcome to the 12 Months to Marathon podcast with me, John Hill, the running podcast for the over 35s with Marathon Dreams. Episode 40, some more help with tapering. Because I've had quite a few questions around tapering from both my running coaching community and also people on Instagram, 12 Months to Marathon. Don't forget to follow me over there. So I wanted to tackle a few more things without going over old ground that we went over last week. So what's going on with me at the moment? So I am not tapering, unfortunately, for any big marathon at the moment. I do get jealous, even though I've only just done my spring marathon back at the start of March, nearly a month ago as I record this. I'm doing the Birmingham Half Marathon, which is my local race at the start of May, and yeah, we'll have to see. My recovery from the flu is going really well. All my key metrics are getting back into line. Resting heart rate is taking a little bit longer than I would like, but apart from that, everything else is moving in the right direction, and my respiratory is certainly getting much, much better indeed. So make sure you take some time to rest and recover if anything like that ever happens to you. So tapering again. So we covered some things last week regarding do's and don'ts, what you should and shouldn't do. And just to repeat, particularly if this is the first time you've listened to this podcast, it is a challenging time tapering because, again, we go from loads of volume to reducing that volume quite dramatically. And one of the big factors that plays a part is the psychological challenge of tapering more than the physical one, because there are a lot of components to humans and there are a lot of emotions to humans that can really send us in the wrong direction. And I did a post on this on Instagram the other day. Don't forget to follow me over there, 12 Months to Marathon, about pride. And I think there is a reason why pride go before a fall, and I think pride is a big element in why people struggle in tapering, because number one, it's that, and this is typically more of a man thing, but again, a lot of females are very driven as runners and very motivated as runners, so they have got that more what's called that type A personality of achievement, if that makes sense. So that sort of personality can lead us to think, well, I'm going to look silly here because I'm not running as fast or I'm not running as far. And that's a challenge, particularly in tapering, because on the flip side of what I said last time regarding people trying to make runs up and things like that, this is the opposite. This is this pride element of, I'm going to look silly. I'm not going to be running as fast as I did, or, I need to keep my pace up and I need to do all these things. And that comes from a lot of pride, because ultimately running, rightly or wrongly, is a very public thing now. It's Strava and Instagram and all these social things, and we post everywhere, which is what we do, and I do it as well, so there's certainly no judgment here. I'm probably one of the worst, but that can cause us problems, particularly when we've got to get into the right physical and mental state for a marathon, because at the end of the day, you've got 2 weeks, maybe 3 depending on the plan you're following, to replenish your glycogen, make sure your glycogen stores are full for the big day. And secondly, you are getting yourself in the right psychological place to take on the challenge, particularly if you haven't done a marathon before. That's very important. If it's your first marathon, tapering is essential, and it's very, very important to get your body primed and ready to go. I mean, it's always important for everybody, but if you've done multiple marathons before, you're probably in a decent spot where you know how tapering works and how it benefits you. So a couple of things that I may have missed last time, which I want to cover off. Here's the first thing. One of the reasons why tapering is weird is because what you got to bear in mind is when you do a long run in training, right, you're not rested and your glycogen stores are probably depleted because of all the running that you're doing. So one of the common questions that I get is, well, how do I haven't run as fast as I want to run on the day in training over a longer distance. How does that translate to the day? Well, how that translates to the day is what you need to remember is if you follow your tapering plan properly, you're going to be primed for the marathon, which means you're going to be rested, and also your glycogen stores are going to be full. When we're training for a marathon, particularly in our peak weeks when we're doing a lot of mileage, our glycogen stores are quite empty actually, because we're just doing loads of miles, and that's both physically and psychologically beneficial, because of course physically it's getting us ready for the day when we have to run in a fatigued state, which is the plan, the goal, and what we want to achieve. But when we're tapering, we're getting our body primed to rest, so it's physically ready from particularly a glycogen point of view to go, right, let's go and run this marathon. And you have to remember that. So don't compare your 20-mile run in the middle of a 60-70 mile week to a marathon at the end of a very light week, because they are different things. And that's the first bit of reassurance that I want to give you on that, because I think that's a common thing that some people have raised and said to me. That's the first thing. The second thing is strength training. So one of the biggest mistakes that I've made in the past is lifting weights and doing stuff excessively in the couple of weeks of tapering, particularly in the last week. Now, what you've got to bear in mind is that even if you don't train your legs, any exercise you do in that last week of tapering is going to potentially deplete your glycogen, particularly if it's, quite intense or if it's a certain period of time. Okay, so I've realised, and this is really beneficial, that actually you want to totally avoid any resistance training and any sort of cross training like yoga, Pilates, any of that in that final week of tapering. I will just avoid it, because here's a concept I want to teach you about. It's perceived benefit versus perceived drawback. Okay, so the potential perceived benefit of doing a yoga class in your tapering week, final tapering week, is very low. It's not really going to make that much difference in respect of what's important, and what's important is the race. And this is a really good mindset shift. What is important is the race you're doing, nothing else, and getting ready for that. And if doing an extra gym session, yoga session, Pilates session, whatever it might be, is going to potentially hamper your ability to perform on the day, it's not worth it for the sake of a small perceived benefit. But here's the key. Your 6 months prior of doing that is going to have an impact, because that's the compound effect. But what happens on the day, in one workout in the week before, could potentially damage it, because potentially it could deplete your glycogen. And secondly, you are risking injury, particularly with things like gym sessions, gym classes, things like that. So what I used to do was I would say, well, I just won't train legs. But the problem with that was I was still training upper body, lifting the same weights I'd always lifted, and still depleting my glycogen. And that's a mistake that I now don't make at all, really. And I didn't make that in my last marathon, and I felt good. Actually, I felt quite good. The other mistake that I made, I might have mentioned this last time, I don't remember, is the amount of steps that I did on the Saturday, but I mentioned that, and that's also important, because you have to bear in mind is if you walk a lot and you're one of these people that counts your steps, that's also going to deplete your glycogen. So the first point is around the fueling and understanding that don't compare your long runs in training to the marathon. The second one is the strength training thing. You've got to consider that as well. All right. Now, the third thing is going to be your fueling, all right? Because I get a lot of questions and people don't know what they're doing when it comes to carb loading, all right? And I get a lot of, I've seen in the past, which is, I understand it, it's not something I agree with, is people asking on social media or in free Facebook groups, what should I be eating for breakfast in the morning? It's like, well, you need to be testing this out, you need to test it. So I think when you get to the final few weeks, particularly, say, for example, if you're doing a 2-week taper, in that first week of tapering, and if you're not perhaps sure what you're doing, that's when you need to research particularly carb loading and think about what's going to work for you. Now, let's say you haven't practiced effective carb loading on your long runs in training. We can't go back and do anything about that now. But what you've got to be really careful of is changing too much, particularly nutritionally, particularly in that final week, and also getting led down the garden path a little bit. Because the two biggest problems that I see in tapering are doing too much from a training point of view, which I've mentioned, and then not fueling correctly. And usually that's like a bit of a pendulum between eating too much and not eating enough. Yeah. There are some very, very big swings in carb loading advice. Like some people say you need to carb load for 4 days. Some people say you need to carb load for 1 day. My advice, simplistically speaking, is that you need to do what's best for you. Okay. I would typically do a 1 day specific carb load with a slight increase on the day before. But the day before the marathon, as it were, would be a 1 day carb load for me. And that's because I've tested what my tolerance levels are like. And I've also tested what my performance is from doing that. But you have to do your research on that, because there's no hard and fast. And you'll get some calculations online and you'll get some really, really good advice on that. But it's one of those things that you need to have tested ideally across longer runs, because the one thing that you don't want is any digestive trauma or problems like that. So make sure that you are... Well, 2 things actually. Firstly, stick to your plan. So if you have got a nutritional plan and you have tested this stuff out, stick to that, don't change it. The second thing I will say is if you haven't tested it out and you're a little bit unsure, do a little bit of research, but don't go too far down the rabbit hole. And certainly, this is just some advice, feel free to take this, don't be asking strangers. because I don't think that's the best thing. You can read some really good articles, places like Runner's World, places like that, where that will give you some clear, concise advice. I've got to be honest, because of my history and being a coach and being a personal trainer and all the stuff I've done in my weight loss, I have done everything I've done from free advice online and practice. Okay, now that's me. Some people do need a coach, they do need support, they do need a community. But I think when we get to the final few weeks, you don't want to be going too far off the garden path, and you just want to have a clear strategy of, right, I need to carb load for a marathon. You do need to carb load for a marathon. Make a decision on that and then go with it. But you'll read some really, really good articles, but don't be going too far down the rabbit hole and doing things that perhaps don't sit right with you. You've got to go a little bit on feel there and go, actually, that doesn't sound right to me. Like some of the hydration strategies I've heard about how much water you should drink whilst running. Again, this is heat notwithstanding. Let's move heat over there, because I'm not usually speaking on this to people who are going to be running in really, really hot heat. If you are, then of course you need to be very, very careful from a safety point of view. For most people who are running marathons where the temperature usually is going to be manageable because they do them at a time of year when it is, you perhaps need to just research your hydration strategy a little bit and be clear on that as you go out, because what you don't want to be doing is stood at the start line and have doubts about what you've done nutritionally. You want to be like, right, I did this and let's go, versus, what do I do here? When do I have a drink? What do I drink? You know what I mean? You don't want to have that. And the final thing that people ask me, which is a bit of a loaded question, but I'll try my best to give you some help here, is your in-race strategy, quote unquote, as it were. Okay, what you're going to do in race. Now, you should have tested this really. You shouldn't be buying gels or anything that, in my opinion, you're going to be using on the day, right? You need to have all that stuff tested. But I think that's something that you need to be aware of as well in your tapering process, just to be clear when you hit that start line on that. And what I'm going to do next week is I'm going to do common race day mistakes, and that will fit into that as well, and I'll cover that off in a bit more detail, but that's just something else to consider. But the three big rocks I want to cover off with you today on today's podcast, in extension to last week, and I do apologise if I've covered off stuff I did mention last week, but I think this is important. It's an important time, particularly if it's your first marathon, so I did want to do 2 on tapering. So the first thing is, just remember, don't judge your marathon that's coming up based on your long runs in training, because of the fact that you're going to be rested or whatever else. The second thing is your strength training. If you do any strength training or associated cross training, put that to one side, particularly in your final week. Don't do anything additional to your last few runs to do that. Don't let pride get in the way of anything. That's strength training, that's performance, that's anything. Do not let pride get in the way of what you're doing, because it will make you fall and it will bring you down, and you will end up potentially failing at something in the last couple of weeks, and I've seen that so many times because people panicking during tapering. And then thirdly is your carb loading strategy. Make sure that you've got an idea about what you're going to do and you do your research on that. And if it's a bit late to test that on long runs, which it will be for most of you, that's okay. Just be clear on what you're doing and get the right information. And there is some really good information out there. Like I said, I think I went to Runner's World and there's a really good piece on there about it, which I found was quite simple. And then go with that and test that out as well. And again, like I said before, if you do want to check out my carb loading video, I've got one in my Plus members only podcast. So if you send me a message or DM me with Plus on Instagram at 12 Months to Marathon, I'll send you the link to subscribe. It's only $7. The link will also be in the description here as well to do that. So it's well worth that, because you're going to get stuff that I only go through in my coaching community in there. So that's part 2 of tapering, and some extra bits on tapering in a really scientific way. But that's how we do things here. So yeah, next week will be common race mistakes. Don't forget to drop me a follow on Instagram, 12 Months to Marathon. I do appreciate it. All the likes really help. The likes and follows, really help in the comments. I do appreciate those. Thank you all for reaching out. And also, I do really, really appreciate everybody that's messaged me and said how much this podcast and my stuff on Instagram has helped them. That means a lot to me, that does. So I do appreciate that, because I love to see your journeys and I love to see your progressions. So thank you for doing that as well. Don't forget to drop me a star rating on this podcast. That's really helpful. So if you do listen to this podcast, you are a regular listener, the star ratings are really, really important. And also a like and a share as well on the various platforms whenever you get your podcast from is also very useful. So good luck with your taper. Chill out. That's what it's there for. I'll speak to you next week about some more stuff, and I really, really appreciate you listening as always, and have a fantastic day.